1834, Austrian Empire, Vienna. With blue skies and clear rivers, it's a livable city, but it's not like the capital of a powerful country in the 19th century. The relatively gloomy sky, accompanied by severe smog, and black rivers, although not environmentally friendly, are definitely a symbol of a strong country in this era, such as London, England. Inside a classic building with a Baroque exterior, the interior is designed in the Rococo period. The antique furniture displayed is even more varied, ranging from Oriental porcelain to Baltic beeswax rough stones. Its owner was none other than Franz II, the last monarch of the Holy Roman Empire and the first monarch of the Austrian Empire. Franz II was facing a choice at this time, a difficult choice, whether to choose an excellent heir, or to stick to tradition. Perhaps it was because of the next generation of relatives. Since Franz II was born, Franz II has been very fond of this special grandson. A healthy baby boy without any mental retardation is his hope, and also the hope of this empire. Yes, the Austrian Empire at the time was indeed facing the problem of having no qualified heir. But today, the eldest grandson of Franz II was in the nursery, taking out 5 letters and forming a combination that he couldn't ignore. A.E.I.O.U. That is a sentence left by Frederick III in Stephen's Cathedral, which is still engraved on the shrine. At the same time, this was the only way Franz Joseph could think of to attract the attention of the old emperor. Austria is destined. Franz II murmured. Frederick III was the last Holy Roman Emperor to be crowned by the Pope in Rome. However, he was not an excellent emperor. Facing the Hungarian invasion, his own strength was insufficient, the princes under him were passive and sabotaged, and his allies stopped and watched, so he had to hunt in haste. He wanted to carry out reforms and get rid of the long-standing disadvantages, but in the end, he failed amidst the opposition of the great nobles. In the end, he had to live a solitary life, taking pleasure in studying astrology and alchemy. Isn't Franz II? His grandmother, Empress Teresa, was so radiant that she overshadowed her successors. What's more frightening is that the radical reforms of Joseph II, the last emperor, and the shock therapy of Leopold II, the last emperor, plunged the whole of Austria into chaos. Such a character. In the era called Napoleon, Franz II and the Holy Roman Empire, who opposed Napoleon, naturally became the background board of the era. The capital fell in two, the married daughter asked for peace, and the Holy Roman Empire was dissolved. Franz II had too much reconciliation in his heart, but his legal heir, his eldest son Ferdinand, seemed unable to bear the burden of revitalizing the empire. His second son also has no ability to govern the country. Yet the eldest grandson of Franz II, a special child. Although Franz Joseph behaved a little weirdly, he showed great intelligence since he was a child. It's just that Franz is too young, and in the Austrian Empire, there is no precedent for the eldest grandson to inherit the throne over the eldest son. Franz II still remembers the war of succession to the Austrian throne caused by the state decree. But on the other hand, there are some things deeply rooted in his soul that he can't forget for a long time. That is the dream of a strong country, which is the dream of every emperor. Is there any emperor in this world who doesn't want to expand the territory and make the country prosperous? Not to mention the emperor, even ordinary people hope to live in a powerful country. Who wants to live in a country where wars are raging, the people are in dire straits, and there are gunfights when they go out? But Franz II, he failed, and let the country decline step by step. He also understands in his heart that he has no chance, so he can only place his hope on the next generation. The retarded eldest son, or the autistic second son. They obviously don't have that ability, at least not better than themselves. Franz II really didn't want the declining Austria in front of him to be the pinnacle of the future empire. What Franz II did not know was that the Austrian Empire in history experienced only 3 monarchs, and it existed in name only after the Austro-Prussian War in 1866. It was replaced by the Austro-Hungarian Empire, a dull empire, and after World War I completely perish in the long river of history. At this time, the eldest grandson Franz Joseph did not know how entangled Franz too was. His soul comes from later generations. Although there were no computers or mobile phones in the 19th century, he was born in the royal family anyway, so he should be able to be a playboy. It's just that he soon understood that the identity he obtained through time travel was the famous tragic emperor in history Franz Joseph. His love affair with Princess Sissi is well known. But his brothers, parents, heirs, and wife all went before him. His empire successively became the background board for the rise of Germany and France, and then completely collapsed in World War I. The life of Franz Joseph can only be described as tragedy, but it is not enough to describe it. He was the last monarch of the Austrian Empire and the first monarch of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. UU reading www.uugonshu.com 2 years after his death, the Austro-Hungarian Empire fell into pieces. However, at this time, what worries Franz most is not these, but the debt problem of this country and this family. The arrears of more than 1 billion florins is really exaggerated. At this time, the Austrian imperial government's annual fiscal revenue was about 110 million florins, while its annual fiscal expenditure exceeded 100 million florins. According to this calculation, even if the arrears do not generate interest, it will take more than 100 years for the Austrian Empire to repay the money. Franz felt sad coming from it. Fortunately, the current Franz Joseph was born early enough, but this body seems to be unable to do much. All he could think of was to try his best to please the old emperor and attract his attention. After all, the old emperor held the real power, unlike Ferdinand, whose decrees had to be approved by the Regency Council. If the old emperor is happy and rewards some manors and properties, then Franz will have startup capital, coupled with his vision far ahead of the times, he will definitely make a lot of money. At least Franz thinks so. The reason why Franz is so eager is that the first time point to change the fate of the Austrian Empire is getting closer. In 1834, the German Zollverein was established, but the Austrian Empire refused to join, which sounded the death knell for the empire ever since. On the other hand, Franz too, who was worried in his heart, decided to ask God. Of course, it is not really to go to heaven to ask God, but to go to church to ask God's messenger. Since ancient times in the East, when emperors are in doubt, they always like to ask immortals for divination. Even in modern times, people read horoscopes for nothing, ask tarot for small things, and gossip about big things. As in the East, so in the West, so Franz too appeared at the door of St. Stephen's Cathedral. Stephen's Cathedral is the largest church in Vienna and the place where the Austrian emperor was crowned and buried. It can be said to be a symbol of Vienna. At the same time, it is located in the center of Vienna, so it is called the Heart of Vienna. Built in 1304 and completed 2 centuries later, the cathedral is both Gothic and Renaissance. It can be seen outside the church that there are 230,000 pieces of colored glaze on the roof. Under the sunlight, the multicolored glass that forms a double-headed eagle is a masterpiece. Pushing open the door of the church, the smell of stale and dust, followed by the smell of resin and frankincense. Entering the cathedral, the light inside gradually dimmed, only the candle light on the shrine shone brightly. The temperature also seems to have dropped down, making one feel peaceful and calm. There was a solemn and sacred atmosphere far away from the human world, and Franz II's heart seemed to have calmed down. The emperor came in person, and Rauscher, who was the Archbishop of Vienna, naturally had to greet him in person. It's just that his fat body and exaggerated clothes are out of place with this ancient and sacred church. Franz too was in a hurry this time and did not wait for Archbishop Rauscher, who was always late. He went straight to the shrine enshrined by the family, stroking the ancient characters engraved on the shrine with his fingers. Unexpectedly, Archbishop Rauscher, who was usually slow, turned out to be extremely fast this time. In fact, as a bishop appointed and dismissed by the emperor, how could he neglect the emperor? Oh! Praise the grace of Christ, the love of God, the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, what brought the great King of the world here. Franz too waved his hand. I don't need the polite words, I'm just here to pay homage to the ancestors. Of course Archbishop Rauscher could hear that there was something in this. Originally, as the spokesperson of God, he wanted to be reserved. But he suddenly thought of His Majesty the Emperor, desperate for face and very impatient. Your Majesty, in God's house, you can talk about anything. Franz too thought for a moment, but decided to speak out. After all, he is a devout Catholic, and the Archbishop of Vienna in front of him was appointed by him, not an outsider. The most important reason is that this fat man will definitely speak along with himself, which is very nice. European monarchs also use special first-person titles. When the Tsar calls himself, he will use plural first person, to show the unique identity of the monarch. French monarchs will say je or nous. German monarchs will call themselves wir. I mean it. My grandson, Franz Jr., displayed the prophecy of Frederick III in the nursery today. What's that? Rauscher asked instinctively, and the next second he realized something was wrong. Isn't it written on the shrine that he faces all day long? In order to hide his embarrassment, he could only show a very indifferent attitude, as if nothing had happened. A.E.I.O.U. Franz too blurted out, with a hint of pride in his tone. This is a revelation. The Archbishop immediately possessed himself with a magic stick. God's sticks are all the same in ancient and modern China and abroad, and Rauscher is no exception. He likes to follow the emperor's words, and he himself is a primitive school, and he has been looking for the so-called natural saint all his life. Archbishop, you mean? Franz too seemed a little excited, because he thought so too. It's a pity that he is not a hero, even if he has an idea, he still wants to rely on gods and ghosts to prove his idea. Naturally, Rauscher would not let this opportunity go, and flattered him hedon. This is an auspicious omen, which indicates that the grand plan of the Austrian Empire will surely come true. Archbishop Rauscher vowed, as if he had really received some revelation. In fact, if you analyze it carefully, there is no difference between saying this and not saying it. Although Archbishop Rauscher said that the hegemony of the empire will eventually be realized, he did not say when and to what extent it will be completed. So strictly speaking, it is not a lie, nor does it violate the doctrine. It's just that this is undoubtedly a booster for the indecisive Franz too. Because it's not his idea, it's God's will. In short, something went wrong, and he didn't take the blame for it, so he immediately became happy. Rauscher has been able to stay in the position of Archbishop of Vienna for so many years, and he still has the skill to observe the situation. He thought in his heart, the emperor is not in the right state today. Could it be that he wants to pass the throne to his grandson? Then Rauscher thought of the Edict of State, and couldn't help feeling tense, but then he thought of Queen Teresa, the prosperity of Teresa's era, and the strength of the Church, and his mood calmed down again. Your Majesty, I have also met Archduke Franz. He is indeed a special child. I still remember that when I baptized him, he nourished me all over. Rauscher had a good impression of Franz, because Franz always held a Bible in his hand and couldn't put it down, so he must be a devout believer. In fact, Franz doesn't know much German now. I like to hold the Bible because the book is big enough to be used as a footrest, and the cover is soft enough to be used as a cushion. Sometimes as a member of the royal family, Franz had to put a few extra books under his buttocks in order to maintain a majestic sitting posture. In addition, it can also be used to beat the younger brother, Maximilian. Maximilian is Franz's second brother. The two seem to be born at odds, and they are always fighting. Naturally, Maximilian couldn't beat Franz, who had been a man for 2 lifetimes, but Franz couldn't really have trouble with a child. UU reading www.uuganshu.com. Then Franz thought of a way to find a book that was thick enough and big enough to press on Maximilian's back, and then sit on it himself, so that the dispute between the children could be resolved peacefully, and the book it just so happens to be the Bible. As a result, Maximilian was often held down by Franz with the Bible on his back and only his hands and feet could move. That way, it looks like a little whose shell is held down. It's just that what the Archbishop saw was a devout believer who never let go of the Bible. On the other hand, Archbishop Rauscher himself has always wanted to find a natural saint and restore the people's trust in Catholicism. But after so many years of searching and countless failures, he made a decision. Instead of waiting for a saint to appear, create one yourself. Now that the old emperor is thinking about it, Rauscher will naturally not let go of this opportunity. If this child is allowed to inherit the throne in the future, then he will become the godfather of the emperor. Flow through the ages. Richelieu, historically famous cardinal. Your Majesty, you should follow your inner choice. Your choice is God's will. Naturally, Rauscher couldn't say what he wanted to do, so he could only throw the blame to God. Archbishop, what do you want to say? Rauscher didn't expect that the always straight-tempered old emperor would say such a thing, he really didn't even want to face, and smiled awkwardly. May the Austrian Empire enjoy long-term stability and peace forever. The old emperor also laughed, he is not a wise king, but he will not be swayed by a magic stick, this is his pride as an emperor, although it is useless. Maybe it's really a revelation. In 1834, Franz was still a baby, 4 years old, and he could only stay bored in the royal children's room every day. The nights are the hardest because an unreliable mother comes to put him to sleep. Madame Sophie felt that she was doing a mother's duty in putting the child to bed, and Franz could not sleep. The big rabbit is sick, the second rabbit looks, the third rabbit buys medicine, the fourth rabbit boils, the fifth rabbit dies, the sixth rabbit carries it, the seventh rabbit digs a hole, the eighth rabbit buries it, the ninth rabbit sits on the ground and starts crying, and the 10 rabbits ask why it is crying. 9 rabbits said, 5 rabbits will never come back. The weird lyrics make people think carefully, but the mother doesn't seem to care about the child's reaction, she still sings to herself, occasionally let out a breath, and is still complaining in her heart, why is the child still not asleep? It's not that Franz didn't want to sleep, but the weird lyrics entered his brain and lingered, and he was so scared that he couldn't fall asleep. You must know that this is one of the top 10 scary nursery rhymes passed down from generation to generation. Why did Mrs. Sophie choose this nursery rhyme? Finally, Franz found a way to tell the story by himself, put Madame Sophie to sleep, and then asked the maid to take her away. Just as Franz took a deep breath, a man reeking of alcohol walked in. This wine smell is very characteristic, it is not just the taste of a certain kind of wine, but the taste of many kinds of wine mixed together. It was Franz's unreliable father who came. He also knew that he was different from normal people, so he would avoid other people when he came. Parents all over the world care about their children in the same way, no matter if he is a relative of the emperor or an ordinary person. Ever since, Franz's father came with a jug of wine. Franz's father has only 2 hobbies, one is drinking and the other is hunting. He thinks that wine is the best thing in the world, because when he is drunk, he will not be tired and will not think of those unhappy things. Franz hadn't cried since he was born, so he felt that Franz must be depressed, and he felt that Franz must need to be released. He also remembered what his father once said, good things must be shared with the family. So today he mixed his 10 favorite wines and came to the nursery. He wanted to share his favorite wine with his eldest son, so that he could grow up quickly. After all, wine is boring to drink alone. He poured Franz a glass, poured himself another, and smirked. Franz's head was full of black lines, and he couldn't help but sigh in his heart, how did the original owner live to such an old age? Then he walked to the door, opened the door and called the maid to whisper a few words. Afterwards, the maid Mrs. Mortia screamed, and soon a large group of royal guards rushed in with a doctor, and packed away Franz's unreliable father. Hofburg Palace, Hall of Mirrors. Franz too is taking a nap on the throne, and he likes this room, as if he can relieve the glory of the Habsburg family in this way. The conversation in St. Stephen's Cathedral yesterday, what revelation and those unreliable plans have been left behind by him. Compared with those risky moves, he prefers to enjoy the comfort brought by the afternoon sun. Franz too has never been a brave person. His younger brother once carried out drastic military reforms, which rejuvenated the Austrian army, and at the same time offended some vested interests. He did not resist the pressure and ousted Archduke Karl, whom Napoleon called his strongest opponent. The result is that until today, those military problems of the last century still plague the Austrian Empire. Franz too knew very well that Austria's influence both at home and abroad was declining, but the heavy debts and entangled interest network made all reforms stretched, and every time it was in a state of pressing the gourd and floating the ladle. Ever since, he remembered that he should have listened to the suggestion of his other younger brother, Archduke John, to carry out economic reforms and cancel domestic tariffs in order to suppress the powerful. At that time, Napoleon invaded, and the local power faction was severely weakened. It was a good time for reforms in the country, but he did not adopt. There is also the German Customs Union, which was established not long ago, and Austria should also join. It's a Prussian conspiracy. We must do something. There can only be one giant in the German Confederation. Once Prussia takes control of the customs union, their development will be unstoppable. At that time, the entire hall was full of quarrels, and all the ministers were gearing up, as if they were planning to fight before they would stop. Both the Minister of Finance Korolov, the Prime Minister Metternich, and the overbearing Baron Bruck have approached Franz too, stated the pros and cons of joining the German customs union, and strongly recommended that the empire join. Being excluded from the German customs union would have greatly weakened Austria's influence. But the nobles in the country objected, such as Prince Wendigeretz and Prince Esterhazy, etc. Franz too felt that he could not ignore these voices, and he had no choice but to. There is no way. Franz too couldn't help laughing at himself, with a bit of sadness in it. He felt less like a sovereign than an old widower led by household chores. Today is the German customs union led by Prussia. UU reading www.uuganshu. The DECOM was officially established. An 8-year tariff agreement will be the basis for dismantling Austria's influence in the future. In front of the Palace Gate, Prime Minister Metternich, Minister of Finance Korolov, and Baron Bruck, these three people who have different political views and are almost inseparable from old age, have rarely reached an agreement on one thing. Austria must join the German customs union. Baron Bruck, who has always been upright, was the first to speak. He never liked to play tricks and firmly believed that everything he did was for the country. The Chancellor of the Exchequer, Korolov, hated the man in front of him very much, because Baron Bruck always liked to talk about serving the country and the people. Korolov is completely different. He never hides his greed for money and power. He believes that those who refuse to talk about their interests are all pretending hypocrites, or they are blindfolded by those with vested interests in a certain field in order to protect their own interests. These hypocrites are often scarier and dirtier than money grubbers. Austria does not want to join the German Solace, but to lead it. Prussia is not worthy to lead the Solace. Germany is where our goods are dumped and where our raw materials are produced. It is unacceptable that Austria does not yet have a colony of its own. Germany is our first colony. After Korolov finished speaking, he looked at Baron Bruck provocatively. What you think, I'll say it for you. I heard from the doctor that it's not good for your health to keep holding back. Don't thank me. Korolov laughed and walked towards the palace gate. Baron Bruck scoffed at Korolov's behavior and said something disdainful. Madman. Then he also strode into the palace gate. Metternich, who fell behind, looked at his two colleagues and sighed. Although these people are full of confidence, but based on his understanding of the old emperor, it is likely that they will not succeed this time. It's just that as an idealist, he is not willing to give up, even if the hope is slim. Metternich liked the title Prime Minister of Europe. It was only after he became the Prime Minister of the Austrian Empire that he realized that giving advice was not as easy as he thought. In the past, as a diplomat, no matter how many people besieged and slandered him, he could defuse it with words. However, as the Prime Minister of the Empire, without money, he couldn't even hire a clerk, and he couldn't get out of Vienna with decrees, let alone reforms. Austria's domestic relations are more complicated than those in Europe. Joining the German customs union is obviously beneficial to the Austrian Empire and has no harm. However, he met with strong opposition, which was far beyond his imagination. Because the cancellation of tariffs will affect the income of some people, and the entry of goods from the German region into Austria will affect the profits of some people, and even the increase in the German population in Austria will also affect the status of some people. And Emperor Franz too was soft-hearted, and at the same time he was afraid of taking responsibility. So the final result is very likely to do nothing and maintain the status quo. Metternich knew very well that if he wanted to keep Austria as the chairman of the German Confederation, he had to either join the German customs union or prevent it from forming. The latter he tried, but failed. Driven by Prussia, the 6 states of North Germany established a customs union in 1826, and the tariffs between the states participating in the alliance were cancelled. The following year, Bavaria and Württemberg, 2 major states in South Germany, formed the South German Customs Union, and later some other South German states joined in to deal with the customs union organized by Prussia. In 1828, Hanover, Saxony, the states of Thuringia and the cities of the Hanseatic League formed the Sino-German Customs Union against Prussia. But who would have trouble with money bags? So these organizations that were formed to fight against Prussia fell apart, and finally became the cornerstone of the German Zollverein. The establishment of the German Customs Union is good news for Prussia, and it is also good news for Austria. Although Austrian products are not comparable to those of Britain and France at this time, or even inferior to those of the Belgians, he is still very confident in comparing them with Prussia. As long as the German customs union is mastered, it will not only alleviate the stretched Austrian economy, but also strengthen its control over the German Federation, thereby reviving the great power. As long as he had money, Metternich could carry out reforms and realize his ambitions. On the other side, Prince Wendigeretz and other dignitaries also arrived in front of the palace gate. Their trip has only one purpose, and that is to prevent Austria from joining the German customs union. Because Bohemia is close to South Germany and Saxony, if tariffs are exempted, it will greatly affect the income of local noble officials. Prince Esterházy even brought people from Hungary overnight, but he didn't come because of money. In his opinion, doing business with Prussia would also facilitate the purchase of Prussian luxury goods, amber, agate, pearls, with less money. But once Austria and Germany establish a closer relationship, the German population in Austria will increase, which is very likely to affect the power of the Hungarian nobles within the empire, which he and they cannot tolerate. Bolstra, the banker, actually the representative of the Rothschild family, objected on the grounds that Solomon Rothschild wanted to monopolize the banking business of the Austrian Empire forever. Now in the Austrian Empire, several well-known banking families have declined, or are in a state of shock due to the delay in recovering the empire's debts. Once the restrictions are opened, North German banks will enter the Austrian Empire, which will affect the interests of the family. In Vienna, inside the Hall of Mirrors, a fierce quarrel broke out between the two sides again. Both Metternich and Kororov and Bruck were experts in their own fields on the side that supported joining the German Zollag. This makes this debate unsuspense from the very beginning. As it should. But can the right and well-founded side win? Presenting the facts and reasoning is obviously not what these aristocrats are good at. Fishing in troubled waters and playing court politics is their specialty. The aides they hired with a lot of money are not for nothing. In particular, the great nobles seized on Metternich, who once tried to establish a German customs union with Austria as the core, but they couldn't let go of the fact that they broke up unhappy. Your Excellency, have you forgotten? How did you break up with Saxony that time, and how did Bavaria break your promise? That's right, even Baden and Württemberg turned against us because of this. Have you forgotten? Another nobleman echoed. At this time, Metternich remembered how these dignitaries were so clever that they caused the alliance to explain. Because Saxony's industrial products compete with Austria, and the crops from Prussia may enter Hungary through Saxony, which will affect their interests. In order to prevent the Austrian Empire from doing business with Saxony, opponents even bribed officials to prevent the entry of Saxon missions. In the end, the Saxon mission had to enter Austria via Bavaria. At the meeting, these great nobles put forward harsh conditions, and even asked the Saxon government to limit the quantity and types of goods exported to Austria, which caused the Saxon ambassador to leave the meeting angrily. After that, he even bribed the close ministers of the King of Saxony, spreading false news that Austria intends to make Saxony a vassal. At this time, King Anton I of Saxony still claimed to be the master of North Germany's most powerful state. He imagined that sooner or later he would annex Prussia, and then fight against Austria. How could he accept the humiliation of surrendering to Austria? Ever since, the business alliance between Austria and Saxony broke down. The three countries of South Germany are closer to Austria in terms of culture and religion. UU reading www.uugonshu.com has strong liberalism and is very interested in things that can make money. Many Germanists even consider themselves subjects of the Holy Roman Empire. The churches in the three countries of South Germany also hope to use this to close the relationship with Austria and resist the influence of the Protestants in North Germany. The churches in Austria also hope to use this to increase the influence of the Catholic Church and thus counter the increasing Protestant forces in the country. Under Metternich's ingenious combination, the attitudes of the Church, the people, and the bureaucracy were unprecedentedly consistent, which was already the general trend, but the great nobles were not reconciled. The great nobles first repeated their old tricks, intending to make things difficult for the mission, but this time Metternich learned his wisdom and found a general who was both a noble and out of tune with the noble circle, Julius Hainaut, to receive the mission. This person is the illegitimate son of the candidate for Hesse and has no inheritance rights, so he should not be a nobleman. But in the Napoleonic Wars, he came to Austria alone, and performed well on the battlefield, and won the title of the Austrian Empire. The real aristocrats look down on this kind of illegitimate son who was born in a wild way. At the same time, Hainaut also looks down on those so-called nobles who rely on the shadow of their ancestors and pee their pants when they fight. At the same time, Hainaut has another identity, which makes the nobles even more disgusted. He was a Jew, and his mother was the daughter of a Jewish merchant. She first married a blacksmith, and later became the lover of the Grand Duke of Hesse, who secretly gave birth to Hainaut. People like Hainaut are unacceptable to the nobles, and Hainaut's vicious reputation makes all those who try to cause trouble stay away. Only this time, the great nobles went too far. Their actions can no longer be said to be wronging the country, they are simply betraying the country. This time they went directly to the French. The time goes back to before the nobles came to the French. Because of the existence of Hainaut, the nobles could not directly attack. After all, no one wants to try it, and this mad dog's knife is good or bad. As a result, the great nobles repeated their old tricks to promote Austria's ambitions for the three countries of South Germany. The three kings of South Germany didn't care, and the officials began to ask whether they could retain their official positions and salary after joining Austria. Bavaria, Württemberg, and Baden, the three countries of South Germany, chose to lie down because of helplessness. After the Napoleonic Wars, France was not weakened much. The situation sandwiched between the two lions of France and Austria has still not been broken. On the contrary, it was the Napoleonic Wars that caused great damage to the rule of the three countries in South Germany. Although the three countries of South Germany were victorious countries, instead of strengthening their strength, there was a huge landslide. Coupled with Prussia's acquisition of the Rhine region, this wolf's sense of oppression against South Germany is increasing day by day. At this time, the three countries of South Germany had no outlets to the sea, and they were agricultural countries themselves. If you want to develop yourself, you can only rely on these powerful countries around you. Seeking skin from a tiger has never been an easy task. Austria used to regard them as a barrier against France, the French used them as gunmen, and the Russian expedition almost squeezed out the three countries of South Germany, and buried tens of thousands of troops in the ice and snow of Russia. The Prussians supported them, just for let them weaken Austria. As for the cost, everyone knows it. The domestic people, the aristocracy, and even the capitalists have long been dissatisfied with this incompetent government. All want to change the status quo and have a strong state to protect their lives and property. A unified country and a unified market are what they most urgently need. This is why South Germany will become the main gathering place of the Greater German faction. The Habsburg family was once the royal family of the Holy Roman Empire, and the Austrian Empire is now the chairman of the German Confederation. It seems that the fastest way to unify Germany is to rely on the authority of Austria and the Habsburg family. On the other hand, the reputation of the Habsburg family is not bad, the status and property of the nobles can be guaranteed, and they can even get a good compensation. This is not a small temptation for those nobles with serious overall financial deficits. Wouldn't it be great to kill a group of creditors while the regime is changing? Austrian law stipulates that officials must understand German. This is a great thing for the officials and young talents of the three countries of South Germany. A bigger country means more jobs. After all, the number of main nationalities in Austria is very insufficient compared to his size. The big nobles can't play tricks, they can only rely on conspiracy, that is to play with public opinion. It's just that Manette had been prepared for a long time, and asked Archbishop Rauscher to report the pros and cons before the negotiation. At the negotiating table, a group of bishops of the church came uninvited. Faced with this group of gods, the great nobles of Austria could not stand up. After all, only the Brahmins could defeat the Kshatriya. Public opinion? Who said that public opinion is against joining the German customs union? Archbishop Linz said with some disdain. The arrogant aristocratic aides immediately turned into eggplants. Only one young man whispered, "This is the conclusion we came to after our investigation." Oh! Archbishop Linz couldn't help laughing. "Which diocese are you from, child?" The bishops around looked at each other and laughed too. It's just that the staff of these great nobles can't laugh. "The parish of Bohemia," answered the young man. "Okay, kid." Archbishop Linz turned to Archbishop Paulsloh, "Your Bohemian diocese should have a vote, and let the kid see the conclusion." At this time, the church still had considerable weight in the Austrian Empire, and it might be difficult to get the church members to hand over their property to fight the enemy, but manipulating a vote can still be done in minutes. "Okay, now who still objects? We accept the Catholic brothers in South Germany." Archbishop Rauscher's words were even more explicit, and there was a lot of contempt in them. The relationship between the church and the nobles in this era is not very good, especially those new nobles engaged in industry and commerce. Because they refuse to pay tithes, and refuse to pay tithes for their employees. Especially after the implementation of religious freedom in the Austrian Empire, the nobility and the church gradually parted ways. The church is attached to the state, and the nobles want more power. Of course, there is both opposition and cooperation between the nobles and the church. Many bishops were of noble origin, and at the same time, many nobles would send their second sons and daughters who could not get a good dowry to the church to avoid property division. And when it comes to manipulating public opinion, the great nobles are really no match for the church. Facing the church, no big nobleman is willing to come forward to find such bad luck, and the only way he can think of is a procrastination tactic. Metternich had also expected the dragging tactics performed by the great nobles, but he didn't think these nobles could do anything else. At most, it is to cause uprisings in the local area. He has ordered the Minister of War, Earl Latour, to pay close attention to domestic trends. However, Metternich still underestimated the lower limit of this group of nobles. Soon after, a letter and 200,000 francs were placed on the desk of French Cabinet Minister Guizot. Dear Your Excellency Guizot, the Great France is suffering from a shameless conspiracy, and the despicable Germans are preparing to unite against the great French Empire. The evil Prince Metternich intends to use an alliance to gradually annex the three countries of southern Germany. Once the German conspiracy succeeds, the balance of power in Europe will be broken. The haze of war will cover the sky of Europe again, for freedom and peace. I hope you can save kind and innocent people from the baptism of war. Truly peaceful Europeans. The British also received similar letters, but before the British had time to respond, the French took the lead. Guizot immediately issued a note to the three South German countries under the guise of Marshal Soult's order, demanding that the three South German countries not join the customs union organized by Austria, otherwise they would retain the right to use force to dissolve the alliance. The heads of the three countries of South Germany immediately panicked and quickly recalled the envoys sent to Austria for negotiations. Regarding the French note, the main combat faction headed by the Minister of War, Earl Latour, advocated the immediate mobilization of troops and the notification of the countries of the Holy Alliance to mobilize for war against France. The great nobles are warning the Emperor. Reading www.uuganshu.com. Now the Austrian treasury is empty and the troops are insufficient. The most important thing is to go to war with the French. Austria will bear the brunt and will certainly suffer huge losses. If you don't want to repeat the tragedy of the Napoleonic Wars, the best way is not to fight. You cowards! Do you think the French won't be able to see you if you're a coward? France is powerful, but have you forgotten who defeated him? Earl Latour was very angry. As an anti-French veteran, what he can't bear the most is to raise the prestige of the French. Latour! You reckless man, you have no money, do you want to go to the battlefield by yourself? Besides, because of Bavaria, Baden and Württemberg, we will shed the last drop of blood in Austria. Wendy-Goretz. The prince retorted. Ferdinand, Prince Wendy-Goretz's name, this is not for others. The French have bullied us to our door, and this is something that no soldier can tolerate. The bounden duty of a soldier is to obey and serve the country, not for your dignity. The two sides were at war, and Franz too was vacillating in the middle. To be honest, he was very disgusted with France, but the Napoleonic Wars brought him too many bad memories, and he was a little apprehensive. At this time, a bad news came. An uprising broke out in Bohemia, protesting the entry of South German goods into Bohemia. The local garrison couldn't suppress the bullets and asked for help from Vienna. Franz too made a decision to stop the formation of the South German Customs Union and to suppress the domestic rebellion with all his strength. After the emperor left, Count Latour glared at Prince Wendy-Goretz. Shut! Dare! Anyone with a discerning eye knows that there are 80,000 regular troops in Bohemia, and it is enough to suppress an uprising. Back to reality, the quarrel in the Hall of Mirrors is still going on. Your Majesty governs the world with the nobles, not with the common people. As the ruling class of this country, the aristocrats are obviously opposed to the ruled common people. And as members of the ruling class, they expected the emperor to consider the interests of the nobles first. At the same time, Prince Metternich, Count Kororov and Baron Bruck were also nobles, and even the emperor himself was on the side that supported joining the German customs union. It's just that those who keep saying that they want to rule the world with the emperor don't represent the interests of the country and the ruling class, but their own interests. Their purpose is twofold: one is to block the passage of the small nobles and the common people, and the other is to use the power in their hands to collude with domestic and foreign forces and squeeze the people of their country to the maximum. To put it simply, the attributes of this group of people are bureaucrats, landlords, and compradors. Although it was said by a group of villains out of selfishness, it sounded fine at the time. At this time, Austria is no longer the Holy Roman Empire divided into states. As Emperor Franz II of the Austrian Empire, he has absolute power. All this thanks to the terminator of the Holy Roman Empire, Napoleon. The Napoleonic Wars greatly weakened the power of the local aristocracy, but inadvertently strengthened the centralization of Austria. In the past, the situation where small nobles dared to support themselves and stand up for themselves and openly confronted the state apparatus has disappeared. Even the power of the great nobles was greatly restricted. Take Archduke Karl, the largest land noble in the Austrian Empire, as an example. He only had 1,000 private soldiers, and he could not face the powerful army of the Austrian Empire at all. Other nobles are even less capable of fighting against the country. So now if any great nobleman jumps out and says that the emperor won't grant it, I will go against it. Then Earl Latour must be happy to give him a ride. At this moment, a small figure slipped in from the door. The royal guards saw it, but did not stop it. After all, he is just a child, after all, he is the emperor's favorite grandson, the future master of this country. The upright Baron Brooks said. Are you going to govern this country with your majesty? You only care about your own interests. Do you know how much open trade can bring to this country? Our national finances have been on the verge of bankruptcy. As long as there is any trouble, this building will be destroyed. It will come crashing down. You are alarmist. The number of banks in Vienna is the largest in the world. Vienna had the largest number of private banks in the world at that time, but they were very small and most of them were in a half-dead state, which could not be compared with London. But who will lend us money? You? The financial industry in Vienna is almost monopolized now, and the country even has to mortgage part of its tariffs and public power to bankers. Can't you see it? It's a matter of course to pay back the debt. Besides, are banks in other countries willing to lend you money? Don't make so many excuses, and find reasons on yourself. Baron Brooke has worked hard all his life, with integrity and ability. Historically, he committed suicide because he was framed and could not prove himself. It can be said that Austria's finances have not collapsed until today, which is already a miracle. He absolutely cannot accept the accusations of others. Do you know what the financial revenue of the empire was last year? Baron Brooke asked angrily. Before the other party could answer, Baron Brooke continued. 130,269,877 florins. Do you know the total debt of the empire? 1,461,224,893 florins. Do you know the total amount of interest that the empire needs to pay for the debt extension last year? 101,221,096 florins, you don't know. Baron Brooke roared. So what, God bless my emperor, Austria will last forever. Do you think it's all your credit? The one who spoke was Petru, the aide of Prince Esterhazy. He wasn't nervous, and even retorted. This person graduated from the University of Vienna with excellent grades and once aspired to be a judge. But after waiting for 5 years in Vienna, the shortage was not filled. Finally, under the recommendation of a classmate, he became the staff of Prince Esterhazy's family. His financial situation has improved since becoming Prince Esterhazy's staff. But because of this, he saw more dark sides of this society. It turned out that he was not good enough, but he had no connections. Those teachers who kept teaching him to obey the law secretly colluded with those officials to sell their officials. At this time, Austria was under the official system, that is, the emperor directly conferred official positions. But the prerequisite for being awarded an official position is that you can see the emperor, or let the emperor know your existence. Prince Esterhazy is a great nobleman in Hungary, and even the emperor can't move him easily. Petrolo has never been ambiguous in his execution of Prince Esterhazy's orders. So what about the fall of the Austrian Empire? As long as Hungary is still there, and Prince Esterhazy is still there, he can give him everything he wants. Seeing that Baron Brooke was at a loss for words, Petru added fuel to the fire again. The empire's debts have not been paid off for so many years, why don't you resign? Give the position to those who are capable. Baron Brooke was furious and wanted to continue the theory. Count Korolov stopped the furious Brooke. Although he didn't like this guy, his ability was beyond doubt. As the Minister of Finance, Korolov, naturally no one understands how bad Austria's financial situation is better than him. There are usually only two ways to increase fiscal revenue, one is to increase revenue, and the other is to reduce expenditure. In terms of throttling, he has achieved the ultimate. He even withheld military pay and royal annuity, and he would never spend money that could not be spent. Even so, the remaining money is only about 10 million per year. And it is beyond his imagination to use about 10 million yuan of funds every year to solve the debt problem of hundreds of millions of dong. It's just that Brooke has lost his mind now, and was led astray by the opponent. 20 years. As long as I join the German customs union, I promise to pay off all the debts of the empire within 20 years. This is not empty words, but calculated by the entire Ministry of Finance of Austria and all officials. According to their calculations, joining the German customs union would bring Austria an annual economic growth of 4%. UU reading www.uuganshu. Even so, this is an extremely considerable income. Korolov glanced at Petru, who was still thinking about countermeasures. Can you do it? Shut up if you can't. Earl Korolov was very disgusted with people like Petru who could only play tricks. Korolov scanned the audience. Which one of you can guarantee to pay off the debts of the empire within 20 years? The Minister of Finance, let him be. Just kidding. Why do we have to pay the debt owed by the empire? The nobles slandered in their hearts. Besides, it's impossible to pay it back. In the hearts of the powerful, the debt of the Austrian Empire has long been a black hole that cannot be filled. Since it doesn't work to be reasonable, let's be tough. Several nobles headed by Prince Elfhazy walked towards Franz II. Your Majesty and the nobles rule the world, not the common people. Do you want those muddy legs to ride on our heads? Franz II hesitated a little, he really didn't know what to do. Seeing the quarrel below, he didn't know who to listen to. His ministers seem to be for the sake of the country, but who can guarantee that they have no selfishness? These nobles look incompetent, but they are their own people. Seeing Franz II vacillating, some people laughed. This was the moment they had been waiting for. So they got closer and closer to Franz II, trying to overwhelm the weak-willed emperor with pressure. Your Majesty, have you forgotten Franz's attitude? Finally someone stepped forward and pulled Franz II's sleeve more and more excitedly. Franz also smiled, he was waiting for this moment. Why are you bullying Grandpa? Franz cried and ran over. When Franz II saw his grandson running over, he subconsciously pushed Prince Elfhazy away. He touched his grandson's head and said, "What's wrong? Grandpa is the emperor, no one can bully me." Then why did they surround you and grabbed your arm just now? I saw it all, they just want to bully you. I didn't do it on purpose. Don't talk nonsense, you little brat. Elfhazy was used to bossing around, how could he stand being framed for no reason, he said casually. Prince Elfhazy realized that something was wrong and wanted to explain. Although Prince Metternich and Count Korolov were shocked when they saw this, they are old fritters after all. What scene haven't they seen? Elfhazy, find out who you are. How dare you talk to Grand Duke Franz like this? Metternich's implication was that you, Elfhazy, don't take the royal family seriously? Count Korolov was not as tactful as Metternich, he roared directly, what are you going to do to the emperor? How dare you? Count Korolov was more ruthless, and he directly confirmed that Prince Elfhazy planned to harm the emperor. Although Archduke Franz is not the emperor now, who can guarantee that he will not be in a few decades? With the support of these two big men, Franz saw that the time was right, he didn't need to say anything, he just had to do one thing, and that was cry. Originally, Emperor Franz II didn't pay much attention, he just thought that Prince Elfhazi was too excited. However, after two old fought each other, an unknown fire rose in the old emperor's heart. Coupled with Franz's sudden crying, he finally couldn't restrain the anger in his heart, and threw the golden wine glass at him. Prince Elfhazi, if you say that people are unlucky, drinking saliva will clog your teeth. Elfhazi blocked it subconsciously, and the wine glass bounced back by coincidence, hitting Franz II on the forehead. Things are getting bigger. Seeing that the situation was not good, Erdhase wanted to see if Franz II was injured. But the Minister of War, Count Turel, roared and rushed forward. Your Majesty is injured, protect your Majesty. Standing beside Franz II, the Grand Duke Louis is the younger brother of Franz II. He is the commander of the Royal Palace Guards. Although he is not very bright, he is absolutely loyal to Franz II. The first time Franz II was hit by the wine glass, Grand Duke Louis stood beside Franz II. Hearing someone shouting "Protect your Majesty," he subconsciously drew his sword. The sword in the hands of Grand Duke Louis is the only weapon in the entire Hall of Mirrors. As soon as he drew his sword, the atmosphere in the Hall of Mirrors suddenly became tense. The Imperial Guards knew that the Grand Duke's mind was not working well, but those dignitaries and their followers didn't know it, and they were in a mess. Grand Duke Louis saw that Elfhazi rushed towards his brother and immediately swung his sword. Grand Duke Louis just wanted to separate the two, and Elfhazi dodged in time and was not injured. But this scene is another scene in the eyes of the people below. Because he didn't trust the Germans, the entourage that Elfhazi brought this time, except for Petru, only understood Hungarian. So Elfhazi brought those followers to see this scene, and they were immediately excited. Kill the Emperor of Austria and take his bird seat. This is a topic that is often discussed among the Hungarian nobles. Although the big nobles joke about it, the small nobles who are the audience don't think so. Besides, as the retainers of Erdhase, they only recognize Prince Erdhase, not the Emperor of Austria. The entourage of Erdhase was about to rush to the throne to finish the old emperor. The royal guards in the Hall of Mirrors may not be effective in combat, but their loyalty can be guaranteed. After all, many people have played for the Habsburg family for several generations, even more than a dozen generations. The entire Hall of Mirrors suddenly started to move, and Erdhase's entourage rushed towards the emperor's throne recklessly. The imperial guards tried their best to block it, some blocked the middle of the royal road, and some directly rushed towards Elfhazi's guards. The captain of the imperial army directly rang the alarm bell that had not sounded for hundreds of years. Soon the 800 imperial guards who were on duty all over the palace got the news and rushed towards the Hall of Mirrors frantically. A bunch of purple fireworks exploded over the palace, and the officers of the city defense army and the Vienna garrison immediately assembled their troops to support the palace. Inside the Hall of Mirrors, Elfhazi's followers have been subdued. Count Turel took the opportunity to knock down Prince Wendigoretz and punched him twice. Prince Metternich hid behind a pillar until the confusion subsided. Earl Kororov found a nobleman whom he could not understand and beat him up. Only Baron Bruck, an upright man, went to stop Elfhazi's entourage and was knocked down with a punch. The gate was kicked open, and a brigade of forbidden troops poured into the Hall of Mirrors, surrounding everyone. Elfhazi watched in disbelief. All this? He couldn't believe his eyes. How could this happen? To be honest, Franz himself hadn't thought of it. He originally only intended to let the leader of the opposition, Erdhase, out. Unexpectedly, this time it was really out of the game. Franz too rubbed his hit head just now, his heart was full of panic and anger. Elfhazi, what else do you have to say? I didn't mean to. For God's sake, trust me. Franz too stood up, walked to Elfhazi who was lying on the ground, and drew the sword from the hand of Grand Duke Louis. Seeing this scene, Elfhazi's body was shrouded in fear. He kept stepping back with his hands on the ground, repeating in his mouth, My ancestors have contributed to the empire and shed blood for the empire. Franz too raised his sword expressionlessly. I still have 3 million florins in deposit at the Bank of Vienna. UU reading www.uugonshu.com. Franz II's sword stopped in front of Elfhazi. Elfhazi felt his body heat up, and he was afraid that he would have to change his pants. Franz II took a deep breath. Elfhazi, who knew no one, mistakenly brought the assassin into the palace. He thought of his ancestors' merits, but was deceived by others. Now he will be deprived of his title and confiscated all his assets in Vienna. Ordered him to return to Hungary immediately, and not to set foot in Vienna in this life. Franz II turned and walked towards the throne, throwing the sword in his hand to the Grand Duke Louis. Grand Duke Louis put away his sword, then waved at the imperial guards. Prince Elfhazi was dragged out by 2 guards, his eyes were blank as if he had lost half his life. Elfhazi's family owns large tracts of land in Hungary, but most of his family's wealth is used to buy properties in Vienna. So it's not wrong to take half of his life. Compared with Prince Elfhazi, those in his entourage were not so lucky. Petrolul was also brought out by the imperial army because he was also brought by Elfhazi. Petru thought, I am afraid that the rest of his life will be spent in prison. It's just that he saw that a forbidden soldier took out a twisted stick from his bag. He tried to run away, but was gagged with a rag when he tried to shout. Petru felt someone tugged him from behind, and the noose was around his neck. The custodians behind him began to spin the wrench at the other end of the noose. The wrench circled round and round, and Petrolul struggled violently due to lack of oxygen. He tried to hold the noose with both hands in an attempt to save himself, but the opponent was a veteran and didn't give him a chance at all. Petru's feet stomped on the ground twice, and he stopped struggling. A total of 13 corpses were uniformly loaded into a special carriage and sent out of the palace in the evening. Franz II, who returned to the throne, hugged Franz. No one in this world can bully the emperor, no one can bully me, and no one can bully you. Grandpa will teach you to be an emperor today. Just bullied Prince Elfhazi, this unlucky guy. At this time, Franz II was in a good mood, feeling that he had returned to the past, the self who was full of ambition and wanted to sweep France and Europe. Where did we go? Franz II asked in embarrassment. Join the German customs union. Metternich reminded in a low voice. When Kororov heard it, good guy. He said in his heart, good guy. This is purely misleading the emperor. So he said, Prussia has already joined the German customs union one step ahead of us. Our Austrian Empire, as the chairman of the German Confederation, has no reason to lag behind others. Baron Bruck thought to himself, fuck, these 2 guys, how could they be so shameless? They obviously didn't say anything, and it seemed like a certainty, and they started to compete with Prussia for leadership. Then he said, joining the German customs union will not only help consolidate our country's leading position in the German states, but also increase the country's fiscal revenue and help the return of precious metals. According to Earl Kororov's estimate, within 20 years, we can pay off the debts of the empire. If not, I am willing to take the blame and resign with Count Kolarov. After the Napoleonic Wars, countries in order to prevent the outflow of precious metals, both set up extremely high trade barriers to prevent other countries from taking gold and silver. Austria was seriously short of precious metal reserves at this time, and its banknotes lacked credibility. The empire was heavily indebted. So what Baron Bruck said was the pain point of the Austrian Empire, and it aroused great interest in Franz II. Metternich and Count Kororov cast contemptuous glances together, cursing secretly in their hearts. It turns out that you with big eyebrows and big eyes are the most shameless. The dignitaries hadn't recovered from the shock just now, and they were shocked by the shamelessness of these 3 ministers. However, the lessons learned by Prince Elfhazi made these dignitaries hesitate. After all, the old emperor in front of him was as if he had been beaten with chicken blood, and no one wanted to suffer from this bad luck. So all the dignitaries turned their attention to Prince Wendy Goretz. After all, he has the military power in his hands, so there will be no problem. Under the eyes of everyone, Prince Wendy-Goretz could only bite the bullet and said, "Your Majesty, the French once asked the 3 countries of South Germany to withdraw from the customs union we formed. In case. It's okay for Wendy-Goretz not to mention the French, but when the French are mentioned, Franz too, who is full of blood, immediately becomes furious. French? Damn it! This is the German customs union. This is the internal affairs of the German Confederation. Why do they interfere? How dare they? Note to the German states that if France dares to interfere, we will go to war. Inform the countries of the Holy Alliance that if the French go to war against us, they will be required to fulfill their sacred obligations. In a word, if the French want to fight, we will accompany them to the end." The ministers in the Hall of Mirrors were also affected by the Emperor's emotions, and applauded one after another. The Minister of War, Earl Tourelle, was even more tearful. The monarch he had followed for decades finally got angry and shouted, "Call to Paris!" However, this time no one catered. Everyone shook their heads, expressing that it was impossible. Seeing this, Count Tourelle had to pretend nothing happened. Metternich also sighed, "It would be great if the Emperor could be so tough every time. It's just that this photo will be a bit difficult to handle." Even though Prussia is an important state of Germany and a member of the Holy Alliance, it is also the country most opposed to Austria's entry into the German customs union. I just don't know how the King of Prussia felt when he saw this note. As for the French, having just experienced civil strife, the possibility of their military intervention is almost zero. Besides, if the French really make moves, the Holy Alliance is not a display. After decades of peaceful days, I believe that France will not produce another Napoleon. Franz also clapped at the right time to make the old man happy. The rich and powerful saw this state and knew that there was no game ahead, but will the blood always be exhausted? The tactic of procrastination, being able to procrastinate and procrastinate, is very important for politics. The reason is also very simple: what needs to be contacted with the envoys of various countries, and related matters such as preparing the venue. Although they are trivial matters, they cannot be rejected. After all, although the matter is small, the relationship is not small, and it can only be said by these nobles. During this period of time, the rich and powerful should look for foreign aid, bribe, give money, and spread rumors. In short, the 8 immortals crossed the sea, each showing their magical powers, just to prevent Austria from joining the German customs union. It's just that today's matter was approved by the Emperor, so it would be very difficult to change it. On the other hand, Metternich, Count Kororov, Baron Bruck, Count Latour, and the almost invisible Minister of the Interior Pilsdorf are also preparing for the final counterattack of the powerful. After all, these guys with no lower limit, God knows what they will do. Earl Tourelle has dispatched a large number of veteran generals who participated in the anti-French war, such as Hainaut, Radetzky, and Anton Feng, to the most important positions, and told them to be more careful. What he has to do now is to give these generals enough soldiers and enough authority. He didn't want another uprising under his nose. Baron Bruck needed to contact Austrian bankers, convince them that the country had a future, and raise as much money as possible. Because of the abolition of tariffs and the opening of border trade, the money needed by then will be astronomical. For this, he must drain the last drop of blood from those bankers. Metternich needs to persuade as much as possible, the domestic dignitaries. After all, one more friend means one less enemy. Of course, in addition to the domestic opposition, there are also princes and nobles from the German states. His secret police and lovers had found out the preferences of princes and ambassadors. Therefore, Metternich specially prepared gifts for each of them. It also includes the King of Prussia and the Prussian ambassador, and of course the chief designer of the German Zollnik Union, Friedrich List. I heard that Friedrich List's investment failed, and his life is very difficult now. Now that the Austrian Empire urgently needs such talents after joining the German customs union. How did I remember this person? Oh, yes. It seems that the Grand Duke lost the paper airplane. Grand Duke Franz is really a lucky star for this country. Metternich felt emotional, but didn't think much about it. Children like to tear paper and stack some weird things, throwing them around, isn't this normal? And most importantly, let Franz too not regret it. After all, the emperor was capricious, not once or twice. Today I want to thank the future emperor again, otherwise they would not even have the last chance now. The 38 tariffs of Germany have paralyzed the internal traffic. They are no different from binding a person's hands and feet tightly to prevent the blood from flowing. Only by abolishing internal tariffs and establishing a unified taxation system throughout the Federation can national trade be restored. Industry, too, benefits the working class. Friedrich List, the father of the German Zollverein and the challenger of Adam Smith, author of The Wealth of Nations, lived a legendary life. The full name has been used here to distinguish it from the later musician Liszt. On August 6, 1789, Friedrich List was baptized in Reutlingen. Usually baptized on the day the baby is born, Friedrich List was born in a craftsman family. His father was a famous cobbler. When he was a student, he also worked as a part-time leather apprentice, helping his father. But soon he showed amazing talent, and passed the financial officer examination of the Württemberg royal family and became a government clerk. After working in the government for several years, he was sent to a university and became a professor because of his ability to work. No one would have thought that this was just the beginning of his cheating life, after which Friedrich List left the university and became the president of the Württemberg Chamber of Commerce and Industry. After this he became a member of parliament for Württemberg, at the age of 30. He then left Württemberg for the New World, America. In the United States, he built a farm, started a newspaper, and started a railway company. Finally, he used the money he earned to buy a mine. He also wrote the outline of American political economy in his spare time. Afterwards, he was even appointed by the 7th President of the United States, Andrew Jackson, as the Consul General of the United States to the Confederation of Germany. In 1832 he returned to Württemberg and began to outline a railway network covering all of Germany. But his national railway system plan failed due to feudal separatism and the narrow profit-seeking nature of the bourgeoisie. In the end, only a castrated version of the railway with a total length of 115 kilometers was obtained, from Leipzig to Dresden. Friedrich opened a joint stock company with others for the construction of the railway, but the shares that should have belonged to him were assured that the Leipzigers were different from the Yankees and that the Germans did not lie to the Germans. Friends cheated. The two crooks convinced Friedrich List that the rest of the matter at that time was just going through the procedure, so he did not sign the contract. When Friedrich List realized that he had been cheated, the other party had successfully cashed out and disappeared without a trace. In the end, this investment not only did not bring him any income, but caused him a loss of $10,000. Some down and out Friedrich List had to live in a cheap family hotel. He dragged his tired body back to his room, only to find that the door was ajar. He rushed into the room immediately. An old gentleman was drinking tea leisurely in his room, and the attendant standing beside him was quite handsome and burly. Without squinting, one could tell he was a powerful servant. The old gentleman put down his teacup and spoke first. "Mr. Lister, please sit down." Friedrich List took off his hat, bowed deeply, and said, "Sir, this is my room. It's mine now." The old gentleman smiled and took out a piece of paper, beckoning the attendant to show it to Friedrich List. Friedrich List took a look, and it turned out to be a land deed. "Then can I take my things?" Friedrich List pointed to the cabinet beside him. "Mr. List, please don't worry. I'm here to give you a present." "Are you Santa Claus?" asked Friedrich List. "If you wish, yes. Let's get down to business. My name is Berg Turner, and I am the steward of Metternich. Come today, 2 things, the first is to give a gift and return your loss and at the same time I brought 2 friends. Berg clapped his hands, and 2 burly men came in carrying 2 sacks, and then threw the sacks heavily on the ground, making a dull sound. Then the sack was opened, and it turned out to be the 2 crooks who made Friedrich List's teeth itch with hatred. Friedrich List immediately stepped forward and kicked them twice. At this time, the 2 crooks were tied hands and feet, and their mouths were still stuffed with rags, so they could only groan twice. "Are they the Austrian secret police?" asked Friedrich List. "No, they are just enthusiastic citizens who happened to pass by." Berg replied slowly, and then said, "Mr. List, are you satisfied with this gift?" "Satisfied, let's talk about the second thing." List was a sensible person, so he naturally knew that the other party would not be courteous for nothing. "My master wants to meet you. He thinks you are very talented and should work for His Majesty the Emperor." "What if I say I won't go?" List asked tentatively, and then pointed to the 2 big men next to him. "Will they catch me and put me in a sack?" "No, Mr. List. My master is a civilized person, but I am not. No matter if I say you are an ex or a dangerous person, as long as I have my face is enough." Berg stood up and was the front of the skirt is closed. "You convinced me, Mr. Berger." Vienna, Hall of Mirrors. Franz II sits high on the throne, and the ministers and dignitaries below all have their own thoughts, but it seems that they are performing their duties and are in order. Franz II said proudly, "Look, child. The Emperor, the most important temperament. You must first have the aura of a king, and then you can make them bow their heads." Obviously the old emperor is gone. But Franz still pretended to admire him, and said in a child's tone, "Grandpa, you reading book www.uuganshu.com. Why do the French object to Austria's joining the German customs union? The French are all bad guys. They are afraid of us. We, Austria, are the chairman of the German Confederation. We are supposed to protect the interests of the German states, so we must join the German customs union." Franz too wanted to educate his grandson. "Go in for yourself." Franz saw that the old emperor had dug himself a hole, so he pushed again. "Grandpa, Grandpa, don't those who have the same views as the French are all bad people?" Franz too was silent. Metternich almost spit out a mouthful of old blood. This is really Austria's savior. Unexpectedly, in the entire royal family, the clearest one was actually a child. It's just that the dignitaries in the Hall of Mirrors didn't have a good face, especially Prince Wendy Goretz. He felt that the old emperor was looking at him, and his eyes could kill him. He hurriedly found an excuse, and left the Hall of Mirrors as if fleeing. The other dignitaries saw 2 bosses, one was exiled in Hungary, and the other escaped. Their confidence also collapsed, so the tree fell and the monkeys scattered. Seeing the crowd fleeing frantically from the Hall of Mirrors, Franz too fell into deep thought. Why didn't he realize in the past that the one he trusted was a villain? Count Kororov felt that this was very good, and it seemed that the workload could be reduced a lot. Earl Latour continued his work. He felt that those guys would not give up so easily, and he must guard against it. Of course, this also has something to do with Earl Latour's personal character. After all, he is a soldier, and if he makes a mistake, he will lose his life. Now Metternich, Kororov and Bruck are all thinking about the same thing, whether to bring Archduke Franz with them in the next political meeting. Berlin. William III looked at the Austrian credentials on the table and slapped the table hard. The Austrians shamelessly asked to join us. Seeing His Majesty the King so angry, most of the top Prussians were unmoved. There are even many people who are speaking for Austria, and they say it without shame. Only the German customs union including Austria can be called the real German customs union. These words made William III very angry. Why did he raise such a group of witty-eyed wolves? Of course, the witty-eyed wolf will also look at him, and immediately change the subject when he sees that the situation is not good. Brandenburg's destiny is to receive the inheritance of the Holy Roman Empire, annex Austria, expel Hungary, and establish a truly German state. Hearing this, William III became less angry. Obviously, it was Metternich's gold-dollar offensive that worked. After all, the interests of the country are not as real as the money in one's own hands. There is no shortage of greedy people in any country, and there is no shortage of loyal people. Merz, the Prussian finance minister, is such a person. As the initiator and actual manager of the German customs union, he knows exactly how much trouble the Austrians have made in the middle. First, sit back and watch the emergence of 3 customs unions in Germany, and then learn from the British to dissociate from each alliance system, keeping the 3 alliances in a tripartite situation, with the intention of making Prussia continue to decline amidst internal friction. But fortunately, the Sino-German business alliance itself is not stable, and the issue of internal unified tariffs has been debated endlessly, and finally fell apart. The South German customs union is sandwiched between France and Austria, and the relatively narrow space makes it difficult for them to do anything. Soon after, the Sino-German business union and the South German customs union collapsed one after another, but the Austrians did not give up. They successively wooed Saxony and South German states, intending to form a customs union by themselves, but nothing happened. Your Majesty, Austria must not be allowed to join. Our industry is too fragile. The Austrians have a first-mover advantage over us. If the Austrians are allowed to enter the German customs union, endless logging will await us. Then the Austrians will use the money they plundered from us to buy our resources and sell them to us. One day we will be their slaves just like the Irish. Gentlemen, what shall we do then? William III asked. Austria must be excluded, otherwise, trade barriers can only be set up to protect trade. Isn't the purpose of our establishment of the German customs union to eliminate trade barriers and conduct free market trade? That's on the premise that we can harvest others, not let others harvest. The man was silent, but the voice of discussion was louder. Prime Minister Walixi knew how to persuade this group of idiots who don't understand economics, so he shouted loudly. Damn! The Austrians must be excluded. If we let in Hungarian grain, who will sell our grain? Once he said this, he immediately got a response from the Junker landlord. What they don't know is that at this moment, there is a group of people like them in Hungary. Budapest, damn it! Damn it! The Emperor wants to join the German customs union. What should we do in Hungary? There's nothing wrong with that. I can buy things cheaper in the future. I'm tired of always buying products from Austria. This time I went shopping in Berlin. I heard that the prostitutes there are serious. Serious nonsense. Let the Prussian grain come in, and to whom will we sell our grain? All the Hungarian landlords immediately responded, Prussian grain must not be allowed to enter Hungary. If the Emperor does not accept our plea, we will fight to Vienna, roaring loudly. Prince Elfhazy just watched the crazy crowd silently in a corner. Although he liked to say that, he knew very well that Hungary could not defeat Austria at this time, otherwise it would not be as simple as shouting slogans. In addition, he kind of misses his palace in Vienna, which is centuries ahead of Budapest in terms of entertainment. Hanover. What? The Austrians actually want to join the German customs union? What are they thinking? Aren't they afraid of the outflow of gold? If Austria can join, so can we, said a minister. Are you an idiot? Are those Germans rich? Let us exchange real gold and silver for the waste paper of the Austrians. Our gold must not be wasted on meaningless competition. At that time, the signs of the economic crisis in Britain had already appeared, and there was a serious shortage of precious metals. The policy adopted by the British government is to frantically increase trade barriers to prevent the outflow of precious metals and to deal with possible runs. Mainstream European countries have followed suit, but Austria's own debt has exceeded the dangerous value, and it is meaningless to reserve precious metals. On the contrary, this kind of stable but unredeemable banknotes seems safer. Saxony, Dresden. Austrians intend to join the German customs union. Yes, the Prussians demanded that we oppose Austria and reject Austria's request to join the German customs union. Why refuse? Wouldn't it be nice to let the Austrians come in and fight the Prussians? We, Saxony, are the center of Germany, and neither the Austrians nor the Prussians can do without us. Wouldn't it be nice to let the tigers and wolves fight each other, and we can take advantage of the opportunity? Your Majesty, wise. Paris, France. The aging Marshal Soult has completely lost his appearance as a soldier. He has been in a state of half asleep and half awake. That's it. The Austrians intend to join the customs union initiated by the Prussians. The Prussians don't seem to want them to join, and there are some troubles among the Austrians. I think we should immediately form a French-Belgian alliance to counter the Austrians. Guizot finished his report and expressed his thoughts. Okay, I am old. His Majesty the King trusts me and you too. I know you are very capable, and I trust you too. As long as you have a clear conscience, you are worthy of His Majesty the King and God. The old Marshal said I wanted to retire safely, so I almost pushed it clean. Thank you, for your trust. I will do my best to live up to your Majesty and your high expectations. Guizot was also used to Surtees' non-stick pan, and he had no time to play Tai Chi with this old man. The Franco-Belgian alliance has always been Guizot's dream. Although Belgium had just become independent at this time, it was the first country in the entire European continent to industrialize. The industrial strength is extremely strong, and the quality of the people is very high. Moreover, the location of Belgium is unique. UU reading www.uuganshu.com will bring Belgium into the sphere of influence of France, which will definitely enhance the strength and influence of France. You can go a step further and include the entire lowlands in France. Guizot's idea is very good. The Franco-Belgian alliance can indeed be attacked, retreated, and defended, and it can also enhance commercial competitiveness. But he ignored one of the most important issues, that is the British. There is a joke that even a Belgian flying a kite might fly to England. The Low Countries are definitely the opposite of the British. The British will not allow any powerful country to get involved in the Low Countries. The British have always been afraid that a country will occupy the lowlands, and then use the lowlands as a springboard to attack the British mainland. For Austria to join the German customs union, threats of force like last time may not be effective. I don't know why the Emperor of the Austrian Empire was so fanciful that he actually said that he would go to war. The Emperor of Austria can have a convulsion, because that family is not normal. But he, Guizot, could not have a convulsion, and neither he nor France could bear the risk. But those traitors in Austria can make good use of it. In addition, the Prussians would not be reconciled to the pigs they raised, and let the Austrians cut off their beards. In all fairness, although France looks down on Austria's industrial strength, the chances of winning the competition between the Austrians and the Prussians are still very high. The Prussians also knew this, so it was much easier. Guizot already has a plan, which is to unite the anti-Austrian forces in Austria and the German Zalug. Find a way to refuse Austria to join the German customs union, and it will no longer be Austria's problem when the Austrians enter the German customs union. It is an internal problem in Germany. Although France has never given up its ambitions for the Rhine region, France at this time is still unable to support his ambitions.